Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club for another installment in building our Estes Low Boom SST. And we are essentially done with these pods now. The only thing we really need to do is kind of sand any spots that don't quite look perfect, especially here where the pieces came together. And if there's any spot in the paper that looks kind of nasty, that should be done. The other thing we need to do is the front and the back of this need to get rounded. Now, typically I use a sanding block for this, but since that's going to be obviously too big, just kind of taking a piece of sandpaper and curving it into a rounded shape is actually pretty effective. So just back and forth, and that'll put a rounded shape into, this is the tail edge, but leading edge, tail edge, both ends of this, so we get a decent shape. I'm also going to, once this is taken care of, it actually goes pretty quickly, I'm going to sand here and here because those didn't end up being as drying as flat as I would have particularly liked. That's not terribly surprising. Neither of these pieces fit particularly well when I glued them on the outsides. It looks pretty good. So they're not level with or flush with the central piece that we used. And that could have happened for a variety of reasons. I'm not entirely sure what the main one was, but it shouldn't take too much time to sand this to get it smoother. And it doesn't really need to be perfect. The only thing that is really essential, yeah, it made some difference, is that this piece is going to go in like this. And so long as it fits and we get most of that peg through, that should be fine. Now, the front one looks great. The back one, yeah, is not as far through. So I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time sanding, and if that's proving ineffective, I might even have to break out the hobby knife and just trim a little bit of this off. Carefully, of course, just so we get this, and even this mid part is not quite, that's going to be even harder, to get them smoother so that we could get good contact with these pods. Now, the pods, again, purely decorative, but an important decoration in this particular kit, so we want them to look good. But they're also going to be sticking pretty far out into, say, the airflow when this finally takes off. And as such, there's going to be a decent amount of drag caused by this particular piece. So it's going to have a lot of holding power, that is to say glue. And there's a lot of surface area here. That shouldn't be an issue. If we're really, really concerned about it, we could even switch to crazy glue, but that should not be necessary. This thing is only going to fly on a C motor anyway, so the amount of thrust it's going to have to withstand is not particularly high. So these are done. Hopefully we don't have to do anything with them for quite a while. The big fins are now dry, and in the intervening time, I had a look at the root edge here. Oops, that's upside down. There we go. The root edge that's going to attach, and I sanded at least a little bit. That burr is still kind of noticeable, so let's actually sand that a little bit more. There we go. So we want a nice smooth edge for this to attach. I've also taken the time to sand each of these joints like so to remove as much of the glue. This side happened to be facing up. This side was touching the wax paper, so this edge, this seam here is still a little rough. This is going to get our full wood treatment anyway, so I just want to make sure that this is as smooth as possible before we do that. I also had a look at the joint itself, and again, we test fit these, so they fit fine. This is essentially done for now. Oh, and I rounded them. I rounded the edges. That was particularly time consuming and somewhat difficult because it's curved for one thing, so it's harder to sand, and it's really quite long. So these are done, they're ready to be attached. Now we get to, I don't know, I think this, for all the difficulty and time that it took to make these, the hardest part, ironically, is to make the motor mount. And you'd think, oh, well, how hard could that possibly be? Well, the motor mount itself is not difficult. Before we get terribly started on it, I'm going to do the measurements that are required. So this is a long motor mount. You'll see why here momentarily. So we need to measure and mark off at, let's see, we need 1/4 of an inch, which is here. And we also need a 4-inch mark, which is here. Now these two marks are going to be the points at which the tricky part attaches. And that's this. So this I cut out of the cardstock piece. And there's another piece here that I glued on. So this has been dry for quite some time. It's going to be the overlap, because this is going to roll up into a cone. And where these two connect, it's going to go kind of like this. Now, the instructions say you will need to roll E and F around a solid object, such as a broom handle or something smaller in diameter, to get the index cardstock to bend in a circular manner. So I've been kind of working this for a while now, just kind of, and I did put it around round things, progressively smaller diameter ones, but ultimately this is going to go like this. So the bottom bit, I've been kind of training to make a proper joint here. And then the rest of it, well, that's harder to do because it's a cone, and I would have to find something the exact shape of the cone to get this to train properly. So I'm going to have to do this well, you won't want to watch me hold this, but essentially I'm going to kind of wrap it around my finger like this, hold this here, and then get the rest of the glue to apply and hold the joint for a while. And by a while, I mean like a while, like more than 5 minutes. So you probably don't want to watch that. So I'm going to start this, I'm going to get it set, and then I'm going to go off camera, or at least pause it for a while because you don't want to watch it set. Hopefully I will have a finished product to show you. That's probably about as far as we're going to get in this. Might be a shorter video, who's to say? Well, let's get started on it. Because this needs to be absolutely, immaculately, perfectly dry before we do anything else. Because there's going to be a lot of force trying to rip this cone apart. And if the glue is anything but nicely dried, it's going to succeed. And we really don't want that. There are lots of obvious reasons. We really do not want to have to try to rebuild this thing after I've failed once. So there we go. There's my glue. This is probably a situation where I don't need to do the 2 layers, but you know what? This is a tough one, so wouldn't hurt. Would not hurt to do this twice. And that's fine. By the way, getting the curve right is probably, getting the shape right requires you to pre-bend this a decent amount, but even so, I'm probably not going to get a cone when I bend this and glue it. I'm going to get a cone-like shape, but it's not going to be perfectly conical, and that's part of the reason. Well, I mean, the stiffness of the cardstock is what's really going to hold us back here more than anything else. I mean, it's really resisting even being as bent as it is right now, and I've been working on it for a while to get it to this point. All right, so here we go. I'm going to put my finger in here. My finger is close to the thickness of this anyway, so it should be a good place to start. All right. All right, so I got the bottom. Now the real problem for me right now is I can't put pressure everywhere. I really can't do that until I've got some level of purchase on the front and the back. Like that middle is, I don't know, it's just going to be hanging open for a little bit. So I'm going to kind of hold things in place, especially this back end here. When it starts to get a little bit of tackiness to it, maybe I'll be able to edge my fingers up a little bit. Because right now the thing absolutely does not want to be in this shape at all. Like not even a little bit. So it is fighting a lot. Now the back seems have a little bit of tack to it. Oh, and there goes the front. Okay. All right. Things are at least getting to where they need to be. The front, I guess this is where my finger is actually the end of it, is fighting desperately to not stay in shape. The back is getting better, so that's good. Yeah, this is a time-consuming, unpleasant process, to be sure. But this is how we get that transition element. It's either that or get a solid piece. And I've done that before, but since this is going to be the tail where the motor comes out, it's not really an option. All right. There we go. All right, I'm going to hold this in this position for quite some time. You don't need to watch that, so I'm going to go off camera for the time being, and I will be back in a bit. Okay, so here's my tube. Now, the seam right at the edge is not touching. And that's in part because the piece that I glued initially to one end of this doesn't reach from edge to edge. So that's kind of unavoidable. But otherwise, it looks, the glue is holding. The seam is kind of a mess. But it's not overlapping itself. It's about as good as at least I feel like I can make. Now, this is part of the finished rocket. So I'm going to kind of scratch with my fingernail here to get off any glue balls that I can. Because I would prefer this to be, not hideous. Okay. And the other thing is, I want to look at the shape. Like I said, it was probably never going to be an actual cone. And, it's not. It's close, but, if there are any obvious spots, like there are deformations, like right here, there's a bit of a deformation where the paper more bent than, it's going to bend when they're more kind of crinkled. I kind of want to get that out, or at least try. So I'm just kind of flexing the tube. Okay, so that's reasonably good. The one way that we're going to kind of reinforce this to make sure that it makes the shape that we want is we're going to start putting the engine mount rings into it. So there are there are three here, and one is slightly different than the other, apparently. It's the one with the dot in it, so that's the one we want right now. So I'm going to punch it out. You could certainly punch it out or cut it out with a knife, just to be careful, but these are generally cut so that you can punch them out with just your fingers. The fact that there's a hole in this, I don't think really matters. The hole is sometimes actually, I don't honestly know. I don't remember the last time I used one that had a hole in it like that, but maybe it's just for identification. I don't know that they're really any different. And they look pretty identical to me, but whatever. In any event, this is going to go in the back, like so. So what we're going to do with that, we need to glue it in place. The instructions say to glue the edge of it. Well, we can give that a try. My gut instinct was just glue on the inside of the cone. But, what the heck, we'll do what we can. We'll follow the instructions, see what happens. So just going around the outside here, Trying not to get too much glue on my fingers in the process, which is pretty unavoidable with this. Fortunately, this is going to be an interior element, so any glue smears will not be an issue on this. In fact, the entire motor mount, that part anyway. Oops, that shouldn't matter too much. All right, so inside it goes. It's not going to go very far, but the nice thing is that if we get it in just a little tiny bit all the way around, we will have given it at least one end of this is going to be a circle as of right now. And so it is. So I'm not going to try to get that any farther in. It is just ever so slightly inside. Now, this is pretty much where we're going to wrap this video. The next step is this thing is going to go in here. This is going to be fun because it needs to go through there and it needs to come out the other side. Now that looks nice. That actually fits pretty well. But this obviously has to be completely dry before I try this. Otherwise, I'm just going to start breaking seams, and that's the last thing I want to do. All right, so drying time. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next part where we do some heavy lifting. See you then.